Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. Deep wood campers and hikers of Reddit. What's the strangest or craziest encounter you've had in the woods? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I do an awful lot of overlanding and very remote camping. I'm generally not afraid of the wildlife. It's the humans you encounter that far away from everything that scare me. I like to use topographical and surveyor maps to find areas that aren't maintained anymore, but hopefully have a rock-based road that we can find in the bush. After a morning of looking for one that I was sure we could find, I ended up coming onto an overgrown path that had seen a lot of foot traffic, tight to get to my vehicle through, but after 50 yards of bush scraping, I was on pretty good bush road. After that, we wound up this rock and shale road toward what we were hoping was a waterfall and/or hot spring near an old logging base camp. I had clocked it as 11 kilometers from the main road when we came upon an old, high-lead logging crane abandoned in the bush. I'm from a logging family, so I had to get out and check it out, thus starting the short but lasting encounter with whatever it was we found up there. I was climbing on this old piece of equipment as my partner got her camera set up to shoot it when I saw what looked like a wooden pulpit a little ways down the road. It was built so a person could be standing about 10 feet off the ground with a grass clearing in front of it. A few crosses were on it. Right at the bottom of the ladder to get on it, there was a 4-foot square, 6 feet high chain link cage locked. That was the first thing that really caught my attention as this being abnormal. I walked around the corner a bit, and I'm standing in the front yard of a squatter's shelter, completely rigged for off-grid. The building had solar and was obviously being hidden from overhead surveillance. I could hear my partner asking where I was, as I calmly but quickly went back to the vehicle and told her what I found. As we went back toward the house to take some pictures, I heard the first of 3 shots fired from below us. The best judge for distance I had was that it filled my ears at that distance where the sound of the gun is in front of everything else in your firing range. We sorted the F out. I heard the second shot when we were getting in the vehicle and again after we were leaving. Obviously, my partner is convinced we're going to get AR'd. I'm just concentrating on getting down the hill. Eventually, we kind of settled down, and I conceded that we were going to camp somewhere more public that night. We decided to stop at a tourist location, very remote still, but it's popular. She wants to literally hug this gigantic tree. I stay back and cook some lunch. As I'm idly grilling and minding my own business, a very busted-ass first-gen Cherokee stops on the road near me, then very slowly drives by me, hard staring at me as I try to act like I'm not being stared at. They stuck out like mad in something that beat up out there. I don't know for certain if they were the ones who shot at me, but I absolutely in no way told my partner about that shit. After we got back to civilization, I told our local Mounties about it. They were extremely interested in knowing every detail I could recount. A year later, I camped on a ridge opposite from where it would have been. With optics, I found the logging equipment on the ridge. No sign of the R shack. I was helping run a 99 planter in Trinity County near the Pines. If you grew weed in NoCal's Emerald Triangle, you know what I'm talking about. And my girlfriend came out to visit. We had a day off and decided to hike down a well-known ATV trail. Well, we picked up at some point and literally end up walking into the barrel of an effing AK-47. Like, dude was just there all of a sudden from the bush. He knew we were coming. He was a tiny little Mexican dude and spoke absolutely no English. He was as scared as we were. He was yelling instructions in Spanish, and I barely knew any. Luckily my girl knew enough to get by having grown up as a kid in East LA. She calmed him down and explained we had a spot over the next hill and that we were just hiking. Dude calmed down and actually ended up walking us back to the main trail where we parted. He was all effing business the whole time. Never smiled or laughed about the mix-up or took his guard down. We most likely had stumbled on an illegal-ass cartel grow. There's a ton out there. And we were lucky as he didn't just kill us and bury us. I camped alone once in my life, though I've been on backcountry multi-day treks about a dozen times with other hikers. I set up camp in the forest only a couple of miles in, but I was camping illegally, so I went pretty far off trail. Night was coming, and I got a nice cozy fire going as the woods darkened. Around 11 I heard noises, purposeful, stalking noises in the undergrowth. I shone my headlamp out and saw at least 3 pairs of glowing eyes reflecting back. I know very well that coyotes almost never pick a fight with a grown woman, yet they didn't budge when I yelled and threw rocks. The circles just bobbed along watching. Freaked me the F out. I packed my tent and walked to the road and asked my friend to pick me up. I'd biked. I'll never do that shit again. I knew they would not attack, but being alone in the dark gives me such a primal fear of being eaten alive. On a 3-day river kayaking camping trip, one of our campsites was occupied when we arrived on the second night. It was a weird family of 5 that said their party boat bottomed out and they'd been stuck there for days. These people had clothes on a drying line, pots full of fish guts sitting everywhere, and tons of food and trash everywhere. My group, trying to be polite, engaged in conversation with the husband. I wasn't the one talking to him, but suddenly it got quiet as the husband finished a punchline to a joke with the N-bomb. My whole group told him he needed to cut that shit out immediately. All of a sudden, the entire family grabbed some of their stuff, boarded the bottomed-out boat, and took off down the river with no problem. They left behind all their garbage, drying clothes, fish guts, and Grandma's wheelchair, and were never seen again. To this day, my friends and I have no idea what the hell was going on that night. It's actually funny and a bit impressing, but at one point, me, my sister, and one of her friends were descending a local mountain, Romania. The weather was shit to say the least, as in it switched between raining and snowing on a very slippery path. As we were struggling with our gear, trying not to fall, deciphering what was ahead, and measuring our every step, this silhouette from behind us kept closing in. There's this one guy in shorts with a huge backpack, the usual hello, but nothing out of the ordinary. He kept going ahead of us and eventually disappeared. Fast forward about 2 hours, and this guy comes back from the mist, but on a path somehow parallel to ours, like 40 to 50 meters further, and vanishes on his way to the top. We started to wonder about him, the shorts, the pack, the fact that he went ahead from behind, the fact that he came back and went to the top again in that weather. We couldn't engage in a chat or anything, having a bit of distance in between us, so we start thinking the worst. He's following us. He's planning something. What's with the shorts? And why doesn't he put some proper pants on? Surely in that huge pack he must have a pair of long ones, etc. I kid you not, but fast forward another 3 to 4 hours, and this guy, on the last few kilometers of the path, is right behind us. The girls, Sis and her friend, froze. They were all ready because of the weather, but this time on another level. I, being the only man there, felt the need to finally confront him. I always thought that in these situations, it's best to be cool about it and at least act like you have the upper ground. So I salute him again and try to defuse the situation by asking him if he forgot his wallet up on the summit. He laughs and tells us he's actually the maintenance guy from the cabin atop. So at the top, they had a vacuum cleaner, Hoover, WTV, whatever you call it. The Hoover broke down and this guy ordered a new engine for it. The engine arrives day before we started descending, and he figures he's picking it up the next day, the same day we descend. The engine arrives at the bottom cabin, and whoever ordered it must, by its own means, carry it to the top. It's actually a path that takes about 6 to 7 hours on clear weather. Blizzards and/or rain add like 2 more hours to it. This guy made it at least 3 times in that day, with an engine in his pack, in shorts. All in all, a very nice guy and obviously fit, like Yeti fit. We all, me, Sis, and her friend, agreed we needed a healthier lifestyle. Yeah, as I was reading this story, I said to my girlfriend, I'm like, where do you get a job like that? Because that seems like a pretty cool. You're getting paid to basically stay fit, so pretty cool. My dad used to tell me a story from when he was a teenager hunting with my grandpa. They used to live in southern Idaho. One summer, they had camped down in a valley and planned to hike up into the hills early the next morning. This was the kind of place where they didn't expect to see another human for miles. Early morning came, and they set out into the hills a few hours before sunrise. Neither used a flashlight because their eyes had adjusted to the moonlight. As they were climbing the hill, my dad turned around and took a look at the valley of brush below them and their campsite in the distance. This is when he noticed several red lights moving quickly across the valley several feet off the ground, heading toward their camp. At first, he thought it could be a plane, but there were dozens of them, and they were randomly moving like a flock of birds and made no sound. This was back in the 80s, so drones aren't a thing. Dad was about to shout in alarm when my grandpa barked at him to keep moving. Grandpa's not the kind of man you disobey, so Dad kept moving. A few minutes later, Grandpa stops and has two of them crawl into a bush that provided a good covered position to look into the valley. Turns out, Gramps had seen the lights moving about way back when they were still at camp and wanted to get some distance between them. They pulled out some binoculars to try and get a better look, but didn't come up with much. They moved faster than birds and seemed to be just glowing balls of red light with no discernible features. Over time, it seemed obvious that they had been hanging out in the sky right above their campsite and continued to circle it for quite a while. Dad and Grandpa stayed there watching them, not saying a word. Eventually, the sun began to rise over the horizon, and as it began to touch the valley floor, Dad's ears were blasted by an extremely loud and high-pitched sound that seemed to have come from the flying objects. When the noise eventually stopped, the objects began to rise higher into the air and headed up into the mountains in the opposite direction from their hiding spot. After a while, they returned to camp and found it absolutely trashed. Nothing was stolen, and it didn't seem like their food was eaten either, so they don't think it was bandits or animals who did it. All they know is that those lights scared the hell out of them, and neither went back there again. I was hiking with my boyfriend and his cousin during the day near a quad trail fairly high up a mountain. My boyfriend and his cousin decided to take a dip in a small body of water we found, and I decided to continue along on my own. We were camping or hiking on Crownland, and came out the day before the weekend started, so the area was not busy yet. We never ran into anyone on the trail and didn't hear any OHVs. I ventured a little under a half a kilometer away from the guys by myself. I came up an incline and around a corner, and the path ahead was straight, so I could see quite a ways in front of me. I was a small, dark-colored animal ahead, walking on its own toward me, and for some reason my first thought was that it was a dog. But as quickly as that thought came into my head, I realized there were no people near the animal, and it was quite small. I immediately thought bear cub. I didn't see any other signs of a larger animal near, but I also didn't take a second to look. I immediately turned around, and I've never run so fast in my life. When I caught up with the guys, they wanted to wait it out to see if a hiker came down the mountain, but no one did. Now, I could have been completely wrong, and maybe a hiker had their small, dark-colored dog off-leash on the trails, but I wasn't taking the chance to find out. I was hiking deep in a valley on the island of Hawaii. I hit the trail that morning and had gone non-stop for about 7 to 8 hours, stopping only for minor breaks to check my trusty compass. Yes, I still use a compass when hiking, drink water, or pick up any trash I find, as my mama taught me to do when I was a kid. I'm rounding the clearing of one of the larger and lesser-known waterfalls when I hear a shrill mixture of laughter and trashy rap music coming from a cheap speaker. A group of 5 young adults had taken up residence around the falls and were having a little soiree, which is completely fine, except as I got closer I realized that their camping site is littered with disposable red drinking cups and beer bottles. I pop open the bag I used to haul the trash I've been finding, and sure enough, it's mostly red plastic cups and beer bottles of the same brand they had. Now, I'm 31 and have no problem with youngsters being youngsters, but I can't stand it when people litter back home, especially in the beautiful forest. They hadn't seen me yet, and I didn't want to startle them, so I announced my approach by stepping as loudly as I could. The group eventually turns to silently acknowledge me, and one of them turns down the speaker. I politely introduce myself and make sure they understand that I'm not any type of government employee or anything, just a friendly local who loves his home. I showed them my collection of debris that seems to match theirs and asked if they knew where it came from. This is where shit got dicey. 2 of the 3 guys with them got pretty agitated at my asking, and in what I can only assume as an attempt to impress their female companions, back up real close to me and turn the testosterone on blast. Yeah, it's ours, what are you going to do about it? And all that shit. Now, like I said, I'm 31 at the time, and have no desire to needlessly scrape with idiots in the woods over some garbage. That being said, I completely remember the years of my life when that would have been my one and only reaction to the situation. I remained calm and civil and try my best to sequester the coming violence by offering to take the rest of the trash they have, just so they wouldn't have to worry about hauling it back to the start of the trail. All I asked in return was that they try to leave the place just as clean, if not cleaner, than they found it. This argument goes on for about 5 or 6 minutes when one of the girls suddenly shrieks and points toward the trees behind me, claiming she just saw someone running in the distance. I've been told that I can be a pretty intimidating guy when I want to be, but I don't know if it was the liquid courage in their cups or opportunity they saw as I turned to check behind me. But one of these alpha males decides to throw his now empty cup at the back of my head. This causes me to drop my compass and knuckle up for a beating. I take a deep breath and slowly turn back to face him, but not before an audible crack punctures the air and this guy's on his knees and clasping the back of his head, some blood pooling behind his fingers. His friends are all panicked and looking at the top of the waterfall, where I just barely make out the shadow of a figure against the sunlight before it ducks back beyond the cliff. I'm kind of at a loss for words when I notice what actually struck the kid's head had skidded to a stop by my feet. It was a narrowed piece of lava rock that was shaped for use in the native Hawaiian war sling, or ma. I decide to capitalize on the apparent fear in these panicked youths' faces and cordially announce, "Maybe it's time you guys moved on." The group scuttered around hastily, packing up their gear and being sure to grab whatever trash they had produced without further prompting. The group hops back on the trail just as the distant clamor of branches snapping can be heard from deeper within the valley, which sends them rocketing back through the trees. This logically should have terrified me as well, but something in my gut told me that I'll be fine for as long as I'm doing the right thing. I decide to err on the side of caution and follow the group down the trail, but at my own pace, all the while cringing under the feeling that I'm being watched the entire time. I heard the occasional twig snap near my peripherals, but refused to take my eyes off the way back. I eventually get back to my truck just before dusk when I stop and realize I left my damn compass on the ground at the falls. As my back's facing the entrance to the trail, and I'm patting down my cargo pockets in hopes that I was wrong, my effing compass hits the ground between my legs behind me and rolls a foot or two toward the truck before stopping. I damn near shit myself, snatching up the compass as I yell back, "Thank you, sorry," and hop in my truck and piece the F out. Whoever, or whatever it was that followed me to the end of the trail, definitely felt it was time I moved on as well. In the days before kids, my husband and I used to go wild camping. The first time we went wild camping on Dartmoor, UK National Park, using an old map, we wandered onto a bog in bad weather. It took my husband, the navigator, about 3 hours to find us a way out. Everywhere we stepped out, feet sank into the mud, and water visibly pooled on the surface of the sodded ground. We were new to wild camping and didn't have the best gear at the time. A while later, we stopped in a forested area and saw police tape everywhere, so we moved on. The next day, we stopped off at a small B&B or pub for a meal. The bar TV was playing Wimbledon, but during a news break, the forested area and boy from the day before were shown. Police had found the body of a guy, 18 or so I think, who had been camping with friends and wandered alone onto the bog in the dark. Admittedly, there was alcohol involved, but I'd been quite anxious wandering around a boggy moor, and it brought home that without my husband, I could have quite easily died on the moor. I love wild camping, but have zero sense of direction, and it's hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it how quickly the weather can change and go from clear to fog so thick you can't see. I wasn't very deep in the woods. I was within a mile of my house. I was with the family dog, and we went a bit off the trail. This man dressed in all camo, no pack, a huge knife on his belt, and his arm in a sling came out of the woods. Some of this is normal, but I got bad vibes. My dog immediately started freaking out, usually a very timid and kind dog. The man started explaining how he was hiking from one town to the next, which I thought was weird because he was injured, had no pack, and wasn't on a trail. He started saying things like the dog must not like him because he had sunglasses on and that he was hurt. Could I show him the way? I just said I'd be late for dinner if I did and tried to go around him to the trail, but he blocked me. Just then I heard my mom yell for me. He did too, obviously, and looked scared. I yelled back in the direction she yelled from, and when I turned around, he had just disappeared back into the woods. Now, maybe it was nothing, but wouldn't a normal person say goodbye or wait and say hello to my mother? I don't know, it gave me creepy vibes. I'm glad I had good old Wally